What if a tasty green smoothie could meet all of your nutritional needs?
This is the future of foundational nutrition. One scoop once a day. Learn more at athleticgreens.com.
What if the same slurry of specially formulated macro and micronutrients is endorsed by some of the most influential scientists on the market?
Athletic Greens.
Athletic Greens.
Athletic Greens.
Athletic Greens 1, also known as AG1.
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 What would you pay for something this simple, so beautiful? Could you even put a price on it?
This was 99 US dollars. It was 90 quid.
But with Athletic Greens, there's a lot more than meets the eye. From a dodgy proprietary blend, Shady Research, and an ex-CEO that was convicted of criminal events, this story of Athletic Greens serves as a massive warning to everyone to not just blindly listen to their favorite podcaster and fall prey to authority bias. There is often an ulterior motive. Everyone wants your money. Hi, my name's Sunny if you're new here, and I'm a junior doctor from Australia, passionate about health, fitness, and longevity medicine. If you find this type of content interesting, then please consider subscribing. The first issue with Athletic Greens is that most ingredients in the powder are part of a proprietary blend. Now you might ask what a proprietary blend actually is.
A proprietary blend is a special formula of ingredients in a product that does not need to be disclosed to the consumer.
The reality is you don't have to tell the people buying your product how much of each product you put in it.
But without knowing how much of each ingredient is in each serving, we can't know for sure if this product will make a difference in your health or not.
But that's okay. There's some strategies that we can use to at least estimate the quantity of certain products in Athletic Greens. The Federal Drugs Administration, or FDA, states that in any supplement, ingredients must be listed in descending order of predominance by weight. That means that the ingredient that weighs the most is first, and the ingredient that weighs the least is last. So it's time to do some quick maths.
2 + 2 is 4, -1, that's 3, quick maths.
What we know is that this product contains approximately 2 grams of fiber. As shown in this section, this comes from apple powder, inulin, cacao powder, licorice root powder, artichoke leaf extract, astragalus root extract, and burdock root extract. In this list, the only pure fiber is inulin. The rest do not contain 100% fiber, only a small percentage, maybe around 10%. Furthermore, most of the ingredients such as cacao, licorice, ginger powder, and artichoke, astragalus, and burdock root extract are way too low on the list to be of statistical significance. That leaves us just with the apple powder, which is approximately composed of 10 to 15% fiber. Ultimately, it's fair to say that most of the fiber is coming from your inulin. So if the fifth ingredient is slightly less than 2 grams, even if we're being conservative and say they dose the first 5 ingredients relatively equally, which won't be the case because the earlier ingredients in the list should have a higher weight, e.g. apple powder could be up to 3 grams. That means at least approximately 10 of the 12 grams comes from the first 5 ingredients. That leaves approximately 2 grams for the remaining 69 ingredients, which on average would put them at 30 milligrams each. That is significant underdosing and a phenomenon Brian Johnson likes to term pixie dusting.
They list an ingredient that you may be familiar with and you think it's good for you. But instead of giving you the amount that was shown to work in the clinical trial, they give you a much lower amount. And so the benefit is, if you look at the AG1 nutritional panel, you see a bunch of words like, I know this and that, this sounds good, that looks great. But the problem is they're giving you doses that are insignificant.
Fairy dust, it doesn't exist, it's never landed, it is no matter, it's not on the elemental chart, it's not fucking real, right? All right?
This pixie dusting of the expensive ingredients is exactly how Athletic Greens makes most of its money. Indeed, most of the substance that comprises Athletic Greens is very cheap. 80 to 90% of it is apple powder, spirulina powder, pea protein isolate, lecithin, and inulin. Let's show a graph to demonstrate how much 1 kilo of Athletic Greens costs compares relative to the first 5 ingredients, which comprises the majority of this product anyway. So you might be wondering why Athletic Greens is so expensive if the base ingredients are so cheap. Where is all of that money going? Well, firstly and most importantly, it is a $1.2 billion company. So a large portion of that money is likely profit for the company. They also spend $2.2 million a month on YouTube podcast advertising. Furthermore, a lot of money is dedicated to commissions for influencers on platforms such as Instagram. It's up to 30% to sale with a 30-day tracking cookie with ongoing commissions when you purchase a subscription. As such, you get a ton of influencers on various platforms promoting Athletic Greens as a way to make a quick buck.
I used to be bloated and now I'm a skinny queen. All thanks to greens.
I know that I'm getting so many good benefits. It does just make me feel good.
And everyone knows anything green is good for you.
This brings me to the next point, which is their Shady Research. Athletic Greens have a whole research department focused not on furthering science, but rather purely demonstrating the efficacy of their products. If you see any research paper that they cite on their website and go into the footnotes, what do you see? The research was funded by AG1. This leads to a significant risk of bias. As a rule, systemic biases favor products which are made by the company funding the research. Explanations can include the selection of an inappropriate comparator to the product being investigated, either intentional or unintentional, as well as publication bias. When it comes to an inappropriate comparator, let's use the most prominent study that they reference. Indeed, it is a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial, which in their defense is quite good. The study aimed to examine the effects of AG1 on the gut microbiome and assess its impact on GI tolerability and other clinical safety measures in men and women. Now, for this to be a proper placebo-controlled study, the control pill should have no effect on GI tolerability. That way, we can know for sure that Athletic Greens is having a positive effect. However, there's a big problem. The placebo used for comparison was maltodextrin. Now, the problem with maltodextrin specifically is that it negatively affects the gut microbiome. In a recent systematic review, the majority of RCTs reported that maltodextrin induced physiological, microbial metabolite, or microbiome effects. Specifically, it induced changes in lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species, which is what Athletic Greens is promoting. Furthermore, only 20% of these studies cross-reference maltodextrin as an innocuous placebo. Now, authors of this paper justified this by saying that maltodextrin is the most used placebo. However, this would make sense if it was a study measuring anything else like neurological function or exercise capacity. If a placebo has a negative effect on the outcome you are trying to measure, it will make the intervention, in this case Athletic Greens, appear better than it actually is. The second major issue we run into is publication bias. This is where the outcome of an experiment or research study biases the decision to publish or otherwise distribute it. If Athletic Greens are funding the study, do you honestly think that they will promote or publish the paper if the outcome is not one that positively promotes their product? Furthermore, the chance of the outcome being random in the paper just mentioned is possibly higher, owing to the small sample size of only 30 participants total. In other words, they could have set out to do hundreds of studies and only publish the ones with positive results, which from random chance is actually quite likely to happen if you're only doing studies with such a small sample size. Now, let's go to the next paper. The first thing I want you to do is to look at the authors of the paper and how it overlaps with their dedicated research team, including Dr. Trevor Kirby, Dr. Jeremy Townsend, Dr. Philip A. Sapp, and Dr. Ralph Esposito. In other words, the first 3 authors and the supervising author or the last author are from their dedicated research team. And then they add a few more individuals to the paper who clearly don't have a significant contribution, given they're like the 5th and 6th author, just so they can claim they're working with third-party experts. Now, this study determined the production of short-chain fatty acids in the Scheim model. To understand why this paper is deceptive, we need to understand what a short-chained fatty acid is and why in particular it is important. These are postbiotics. They're a subset of fatty acids produced by the gut microbiota during the fermentation of partially and non-digestible polysaccharides. Often we term the gut microbiome, which does the converting, a probiotic, and the fiber or food for these organisms a prebiotic.
The microbiome, when we talk about it, is all these, bacterial and yeast strains. That's the probiotic. So the probiotic is the living organism itself. Prebiotic is the food that feeds those organisms. So we talked about, fibers and inulin and polyphenols and things like that. Those are prebiotics. So prebiotics are the food, the probiotic is the organism itself, and then what these organisms produce or what they secrete is now being called the postbiotic.
In this study, they compared their athletic greens, which contains 2 grams of fiber, so the prebiotic, and some useful bacteria, lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, which is the probiotic, to a control which contained absolutely nothing using the Scheim model. So there's a few issues with this. Number one, it's not actually in vivo. The authors themselves recognize that in vitro work does not actually replace the need for clinical experimentation and seldom translates perfectly to what is expected in a human study. Secondly, the control group contained nothing. Not even fiber. Ultimately, they're comparing athletic greens to a control which does not even contain the precursors to fatty acid production, and then showing that their product is superior to that. But what is the clinical significance of that? A better model would be to have a control group with 2 grams of fiber to demonstrate that the supposed synergistic effects between the probiotics in their supplement and the fiber is superior to fiber consumption itself, i.e. it has a supposed symbiotic effect. However, the research paper doesn't really show this because the control group has no fiber. Again, by reducing the efficacy of the control group, they have made their product superficially appear superior. So what do the experts say about probiotics? Ultimately, there is minimal evidence to even suggest that probiotics may be beneficial and that prebiotics offer most of the benefit in terms of producing short-chain fatty acids.
Prebiotics seem to work much better than probiotics.
Supplemented prebiotics.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the problem with most of the probiotics is they're typically not concentrated enough to actually colonize. And even if you do colonize, what happens is, like, let's say you colonize some microbiota that you didn't really have much of. If you're not fueling it with the appropriate fiber, it's not going to stay anyway because it's essentially going to starve. So the research seems to really clearly suggest that eating enough fiber, which is, again, a prebiotic, that is a better way to get a healthier gut per se.
Athletic greens only contains 2 grams of fiber, which is approximately 10% of the recommended daily allowance. To put that into context, there is more fiber in a single apple. Furthermore, they had a paper showing that they quote-unquote doubled the content of friendly bacteria in the gut. The study basically showed that consuming the supplement would increase the number of bacteria that were present in the supplement. Like, who would have known that eating more of something would cause more of that to be found in your stomach? The problem is this oversimplification and assuming that one form of bacteria is inherently good for you, when this may not necessarily be the case. Currently, the research on probiotics is in its infancy and there's a lot we don't know. To be honest, at this stage, they are not even recommending it for healthy people.
The ACG does not recommend probiotic use for people generally outside of very few clinical conditions that require it, because we don't even know what strains at what doses in which scenario are going to be beneficial. And we know that with lots of the probiotic research, that it doesn't have benefits and it can have harms and risks, which is why the ACG looks at it that way.
Which is the major demographic this supplement is targeting anyway. All right, now on to the next paper. This one is on the increased multivitamin absorption that Athletic Greens offers. The study shows that in an in vitro model, Athletic Greens confers a superior bioavailability of minerals, namely magnesium, zinc, calcium, and potassium. They essentially compared the total solubility of the AG1 powder versus a tablet multivitamin. There are a few major flaws with this study. Firstly, the SHIME model, which is an in vivo simulation, really struggles to mimic peristalsis. This is where your body physically breaks down and moves compounds such as tablets through mechanical pressure. Given this is harder to occur here, it gives the impression that the multivitamin powder is less bioavailable than it might be in reality, making AG1 seem comparatively superior. Again, back on this idea, rather than having a superior product, why not just make the comparator worse? Continuing with this idea of making the control group as bad as possible, some multivitamins contain microcrystalline cellulose, which is hygroscopic and could reduce water absorption. The control group for the multivitamin in this study did have it. However, it's important to appreciate that not all multivitamins will contain microcrystalline cellulose. Amazon's Choice multivitamin Synovus, which retails for $16.99, doesn't contain it. Neither does their best seller Centrum. Thirdly, it's also well known that powders in general have an increased solubility due to their higher surface area relative to a tablet. This increases ionization of the mineral by impacting how much mineral can directly access salts. However, this doesn't necessarily make AG1 intrinsically superior, as you could just easily crush your multivitamin tablet and dissolve it in water for a similar effect. You don't need to pay 180 Australian dollars for 360 grams of powder. Fourth, a higher absorption of multivitamins doesn't mean anything if the dose itself is low. For instance, Athletic Greens contains 26 milligrams of magnesium, which is 6% of the recommended daily intake. In comparison, the Centrum multivitamin has 84 milligrams and Swiss is 106 milligrams. So even if they theoretically had a lower absorption, it doesn't really mean much. These multivitamins are also far cheaper, by the way. Alright, the fifth thing. More is not necessarily better in the case of multivitamins. Studies have shown that most adults get most of what they need and that multivitamins are not associated with a lower risk of death for healthy adults. Let's also have a closer look at some of the ingredients in Athletic Greens. A scoop contains 525% of your required vitamin C, 8,000% of your required vitamin B12, and 660% of biotin or vitamin B7. That's a lot, but here's the thing, these vitamins are water soluble. If the body has an excess, they get flushed out. That's a lot of money you're paying for expensive urine.
Oh boy.
What now?
Well, there's some value to taking a multivitamin, but you're buying here are the ingredients for very expensive urine.
The funniest part is that Athletic Greens isn't even addressing the main nutrient deficiencies we have. The most common nutrient deficiency in the world is iron, and Athletic Greens doesn't even contain this. Rather than focusing on the fundamentals, Athletic Greens focuses on incorporating trace amounts of long word, complex sounding ingredients such as fucodian extract from the seawood Fucus pediculosus and eleuthero root extract.
I can't even pronounce half this
This gives the impression to the naive consumer that they are supplementing with something amazing when, like mentioned previously, they're just getting a lot of pixie dust. Now, let's go into the final issue with supplements in general, which is this idea of unvalidated claims. It's quite easy to look at supplements and think that it's similar to medicine, so it would be regulated like medicine, strictly monitored with tight regulations. But actual medicine goes through a very different process to supplements, a super lengthy process with tons of studies, clinical trials, and papers so that they can be approved by the FDA. Supplements don't need to do this. Instead, the onus is on the company itself.
Companies are responsible for ensuring their products are safe, and in fact can often put new dietary supplements on the market without even telling FDA.
This is due to intense lobbying in the 1990s by supplement companies, as well as significant marketing campaigns.
Hey, guys, it's only vitamins. Vitamin C, like in oranges.
If you don't want to lose your vitamins, make the FDA stop.
The lobbying eventually resulted in legislation that flat out states that the federal government should not take any action to impose unreasonable regulatory barriers limiting or slowing the flow of these supplements. Ultimately, these supplement manufacturers can claim whatever they want if they disclose that this hasn't been confirmed by the FDA. And that is exactly what Athletic Greens is doing.
It says daily support for energy and immune system, brain and neural function, liver function, gut health and digestion, hormone function. But there's an asterisk next to each of these claims. What do you say to people who say, well, then why should I spend $3 a day on this?
We actually have to put the asterisk there to state that while there is a hoard of scientific data, that the ingredients exist inside this product that can substantiate those support claims, those specific claims have not been validated by the FDA.
Stop the cap!
If you think mistakes like this are only limited to people without formal qualifications or higher education, you'd be mistaken. Watch this video right here to learn how Harvard professor David Sinclair founded a $720 million supplement company based on what was simply a faulty test tube artifact.